The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain of the Afghan mountains. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez wiped the sweat from his forehead as he checked his rifle for the third time. His SEAL team had been tracking a high-value target for 6 days through some of the most dangerous territory in the region. Intelligence suggested that Ahmad Hassan, a Taliban commander responsible for multiple attacks on coalition forces, was hiding in a compound just 2 kilometers ahead. Rodriguez looked at his team. There was Petty Officer James "Tank" Morrison, their explosives expert whose massive frame made him look more like a linebacker than a Navy SEAL. Next to him crouched Hospital Corpsman Second Class Lisa Chen, the team's medic whose steady hands had saved more lives than anyone could count. Behind them, communications specialist Dylan Brooks was quietly adjusting his radio equipment, ensuring they maintained contact with base. The team had been inserted by helicopter under cover of darkness 3 days ago. Since then, they had been moving carefully through Taliban-controlled territory, avoiding patrols and gathering intelligence. Every step was calculated. Every breath was measured. They knew that one mistake could mean death or capture. Rodriguez studied the terrain ahead through his binoculars. The compound sat on a hilltop, surrounded by high walls and guard towers. Intelligence reports indicated Hassan was meeting with other commanders to plan coordinated attacks on American bases. The mission was simple in concept, but dangerous in execution. Capture or eliminate Hassan, and gather any intelligence materials. "Boss, we've got movement," Tank whispered, pointing toward the compound. Through the scope, Rodriguez could see guards patrolling the perimeter. They were well armed and alert. This wouldn't be easy. Chen moved up beside them, her medical pack secured tightly to her back. She had volunteered for this mission, despite the risks. As the only woman on the team, she had faced skepticism from some quarters, but her skills and dedication had earned the respect of every member of the unit. Brooks established communication with their Overwatch team positioned on a ridge 2 kilometers away. Sniper Team Alpha, led by Chief Petty Officer Sarah Williams, was their insurance policy. Williams was known throughout the special operations community for her exceptional marksmanship. At 34, she had more confirmed kills at extreme range than any other sniper in the Navy. "Overwatch, this is ground team," Brooks whispered into his radio. "We're in position. Request status update." Williams' voice crackled through the radio. "Ground team, this is Overwatch. We have eyes on the compound. Count 8 hostiles visible. Weather conditions are optimal. Wind speed 2 knots from the southeast." Rodriguez felt reassured knowing Williams was watching over them. Her M107 .50 caliber rifle could reach out and touch targets at distances that seemed impossible to most people. The team had worked with her before, and her reputation was well-deserved. The plan was straightforward. Rodriguez's team would approach from the east, while another SEAL team moved in from the west. They would breach the compound simultaneously, creating confusion and limiting the enemy's ability to coordinate their defense. Williams would provide overwatch, eliminating any threats that emerged from the compound or nearby positions. As they began their final approach, Rodriguez couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The compound seemed too quiet. The guards appeared nervous, constantly looking over their shoulders. Years of combat experience had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now they were screaming that this was a trap. "Tank, what's your assessment?" Rodriguez asked quietly. Morrison studied the compound through his scope. "Something's off, boss. Security seems lighter than expected. But the guards look jumpy." "Could be. They're expecting us." Chen nodded in agreement. "The intelligence could be compromised. Maybe we should call this off and reassess." Rodriguez considered their options. They had come too far and risked too much to turn back now. Hassan was responsible for the deaths of dozens of coalition soldiers. This might be their only chance to get him. "We proceed as planned," Rodriguez decided. "But everyone stays extra alert. If this goes sideways, we extract immediately." The team moved forward, using the rocky terrain for cover. Each member knew their role perfectly. They had trained for months for missions exactly like this one. Trust in each other was absolute. As they got closer to the compound, they could hear voices speaking in Pashto. The guards seemed agitated about something. Rodriguez wished he spoke the language better, but he could tell from their tone that something had them worried. Brooks maintained constant communication with Williams' Overwatch team. Overwatch? Any change in the situation? Negative, ground team. Still count 8 visible hostiles. Wait. I'm seeing additional movement in the valley to your north. Looks like a convoy approaching the compound. Rodriguez's blood ran cold. A convoy could mean reinforcements, or it could mean Hassan was about to leave. Either way, it complicated their mission significantly. How many vehicles? Rodriguez asked. 3 trucks. Estimate 15 to 20 additional hostiles. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. What had been planned as a surgical strike against a lightly defended compound was turning into a potential battle against superior numbers in enemy territory. Morrison checked his explosives again. Boss, we can still do this. Hit them hard and fast before they get organized. Rodriguez made a command decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. We're going in. Chen, stay with Brooks at the rally point. Tank, you're with me. We breach, find Hassan, and get out. They moved to the compound wall under cover of darkness. Morrison placed shaped charges at 2 different points to create multiple breach points and confuse the defenders about where the main assault was coming from. The explosions shattered the morning quiet. Rodriguez and Morrison burst through the smoking holes in the wall, moving with practiced precision. Inside the compound, confusion reigned. Guards ran in different directions, some toward the breaches, others toward the main building, where Hassan was likely hiding. Williams' voice came through their earpieces. Ground team, be advised, the convoy has arrived, multiple hostiles dismounting and moving toward your position. Rodriguez and Morrison fought their way toward the main building. They encountered fierce resistance from well-trained fighters who had clearly been expecting them. The intelligence had definitely been compromised. Tank, we need to reach that building fast, Rodriguez shouted over the gunfire. Morrison nodded and prepared another explosive charge. The blast blew open the building's main entrance, but as they approached, automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple windows. They were pinned down in the open courtyard with nowhere to take cover. Boss, we've got problems, Morrison said, reloading his weapon. There's too many of them. Rodriguez could see muzzle flashes from at least a dozen positions around the compound. The convoy had brought experienced fighters, not just local militia. This was turning into a fight they couldn't win. Chen's voice crackled through their radios. Ground team, we've got movement all around our position. They're trying to surround us. Rodriguez realized they had walked into a carefully planned ambush. Hassan had known they were coming and had prepared accordingly. The compound wasn't his hideout, it was his trap. Williams's voice cut through the chaos. Ground team, I count at least 30 hostiles now in the compound. You need to extract immediately. Rodriguez and Morrison began fighting their way back toward the breach in the wall. Enemy fire was coming from every direction. Morrison took a bullet in the shoulder but kept moving. Rodriguez's rifle ran dry, and he switched to his sidearm. They reached the wall just as Chen and Brooks came under heavy attack at the rally point. The team was scattered, outgunned, and running out of ammunition. Rodriguez made the hardest decision of his military career. All teams, this is ground leader, he said into his radio, his voice barely audible over the gunfire. We're finished. 3 kilometers away, Chief Petty Officer Sarah Williams heard Rodriguez's desperate transmission through her headset. The words hit her like a physical blow. She had been a sniper for 12 years, and she had never lost a team she was providing overwatch for. She wasn't about to start now. Williams adjusted her position on the rocky outcropping where she had set up her observation post. Her spotter, Petty Officer Marcus Thompson, was already calculating wind speed and atmospheric conditions. The distance to the compound was extreme, even for her custom-modified M107 rifle. At 3 kilometers, she would be pushing the absolute limits of what was possible. Range to target? Williams asked, her voice steady despite the chaos she could hear through the radio. 2,960 meters, Thompson replied, his eye pressed to the spotting scope. Wind is picking up. Now, reading 4 knots from the southeast. Williams had made shots at this distance before, but never with friendly forces in such immediate danger. Through her scope, she could see muzzle flashes from dozens of positions around the compound. Her teammates were trapped in a killing field with no way out. She identified the most immediate threats first. A machine gun position on the compound's north tower was pouring fire down on Rodriguez and Morrison's position. Another group of fighters had established a position near the breach in the wall, cutting off their escape route. Williams took a deep breath and settled behind her rifle. The first shot had to count. At this distance, the bullet would take nearly 4 seconds to reach its target. During those 4 seconds, anything could happen. The target could move. The wind could shift. Her teammates could die. She centered the crosshairs on the machine gunner in the north tower. Her finger found the trigger. Years of training took over. She controlled her breathing, her heart rate, her entire being focused on this single moment. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. The .50 caliber round left the barrel at over 2,800 feet per second. But at this distance, gravity and air resistance would significantly affect its trajectory. Williams watched through her scope as the bullet arced through the air. 4 seconds felt like an eternity. The machine gunner in the tower suddenly jerked backward and disappeared from view. The withering fire from that position stopped immediately. "Target down," Thompson confirmed. "Nice shot, Chief." But Williams was already acquiring her next target. A group of fighters near the breach point were advancing on Rodriguez and Morrison's position. She could see through her scope that Morrison was wounded, and Rodriguez was trying to drag him to safety. She adjusted her aim for the new wind conditions. The second shot took down the lead fighter, advancing through the breach. The others scattered, buying Rodriguez precious seconds to get Morrison to cover. Williams could hear Chen and Brooks under attack at the rally point. She shifted her scope to find their position. Multiple fighters were converging on them from different directions. Chen was providing covering fire, while Brooks tried to establish communication with extraction teams. Thompson was calling out targets and calculating solutions faster than Williams had ever seen. 3 hostiles approaching Chen's position from the east. Range 2,800 meters. Wind holding steady at 4 knots. Williams took the shot. The lead attacker dropped. She worked the bolt and acquired the second target. Another shot. Another hit. The third attacker dove for cover behind a rock formation, but for every target Williams eliminated, 2 more seemed to take their place. The Taliban had brought a significant force to this ambush, and they were determined to eliminate the SEAL team completely. Rodriguez's voice came through the radio again, strained with pain and exhaustion. "Overwatch. We're trapped in the compound. Morrison is hit bad. We need immediate extraction." Williams could see their position through her scope. They had taken cover behind a low wall inside the compound. But enemies were closing in from multiple directions. Morrison was unconscious and bleeding heavily. Rodriguez was down to his sidearm. She began engaging targets with mechanical precision. Each shot was carefully calculated and deliberately placed. She targeted leaders first, recognizing them by their behavior and equipment. Without leadership, the attacking forces would become disorganized and less effective. Thompson kept providing spotting information while monitoring radio communications. "Chen and Brooks are moving to a new position. They're trying to get closer to Rodriguez and Morrison." Williams could see Chen's team moving through the rocks outside the compound. They were taking heavy fire. But Chen's medical training and Brooks's communication skills were keeping them alive. They moved with purpose, clearly planning something. "Chief, I've got eyes on Hassan," Thompson said suddenly. "He's in the main building, 3rd floor window." Williams shifted her scope to the building. Through the window, she could see a figure directing the battle. This had to be their primary target. Taking him out might cause enough confusion to allow her team to escape, but Hassan was partially concealed behind cover, and there were civilians visible in the building. Williams had rules of engagement to follow. Even in a situation like this, she needed a clean shot with no risk of collateral damage. She waited, watching through her scope as Hassan moved around the room. He seemed to be coordinating the attack through radio communications. Williams needed him to step into the open for just a few seconds. Meanwhile, the battle continued to rage around the compound. Williams had fired 15 rounds so far, with 14 confirmed hits. But ammunition was becoming a concern. She had brought 40 rounds for this mission, expecting to fire no more than 5 or 6. At this rate, she would run out before her team could escape. Thompson was tracking every shot and keeping count. 25 rounds remaining, Chief. Williams nodded grimly. She had to make every shot count from here on out. No wasted ammunition, no uncertain targets. Only shots that would directly contribute to her team's survival. Chen and Brooks had reached the compound wall and were preparing to breach from a different location. Williams could see them placing explosive charges while under heavy fire. Their courage was remarkable, but Williams knew they were running out of time. Rodriguez was trying to stop Morrison's bleeding while returning fire with his pistol. His ammunition was almost exhausted, and Morrison was losing consciousness from blood loss. If they didn't get medical attention soon, Morrison would die. Williams made a decision that went against everything she had been trained to do. Instead of waiting for perfect shots, she began engaging targets rapidly, using suppressive fire to keep enemy heads down while Chen and Brooks made their assault. She fired 3 quick shots at a group of fighters preparing to throw grenades at Rodriguez's position. 2 hits. 1 miss. The survivors scattered, and the grenades were never thrown. Another 3 shots at fighters moving to flank Chen's position. All hits. The flanking maneuver was stopped cold. Hassan finally stepped into the open at his window. Williams had been waiting for this moment. She centered her crosshairs on the Taliban commander's chest and began her breathing cycle. But just as she was about to fire, a massive explosion rocked the compound. Chen and Brooks had detonated their charges and were fighting their way inside. The blast caused Hassan to duck back behind cover, and Williams lost her shot. The battle was entering a new phase. Williams had eliminated many of the outside threats, but now her teammates were inside the compound, engaging enemies at close quarters, where her long-range support would be less effective. She could hear automatic weapons fire and explosions echoing across the valley. Through her scope, she could see muzzle flashes from inside the buildings. Her teammates were fighting for their lives in rooms and corridors where her rifle couldn't reach. Thompson was monitoring multiple radio frequencies, trying to coordinate with extraction teams and other support elements. Helicopters are en route, but they're still 20 minutes out, he reported. 20 minutes might as well have been 20 hours. Williams knew her teammates didn't have that long. Morrison needed immediate medical attention, and all of them were running low on ammunition. She had to do something to change the dynamics of this battle. Looking through her scope, she identified the compound's fuel storage area. Several large containers were visible near the main building. If she could ignite them, the explosion and fire might create enough chaos for her team to escape. Williams adjusted her scope for the fuel containers. This would require precise shot placement to puncture the containers and create sparks that could ignite the fuel. It was a desperate gamble, but desperate times called for desperate measures. She took careful aim at the first container. The shot had to be perfect. Too high and the bullet would pass over the target. Too low, and it might hit something else. The angle had to create sparks while puncturing the metal. Williams fired. The bullet struck the container perfectly, punching through the metal and creating a shower of sparks. But the fuel didn't ignite immediately. She fired again at a second container, then a third. Suddenly, a massive fireball erupted in the compound. The explosion was far larger than Williams had expected. The blast shook buildings, shattered windows, and sent debris flying in all directions. Secondary explosions followed, as the fire spread to other flammable materials. The Taliban fighters were caught completely off guard by the explosion. Many were thrown to the ground or injured by flying debris. In the confusion that followed, Williams could see her teammates beginning to move toward extraction points. But the mission was far from over. Hassan was still alive, and Williams could see him organizing a new defensive position. The fire had bought her teammates some time, but it had also made their situation more dangerous by trapping them in a burning compound. Thompson was calling out new targets as they emerged from the smoke and flames. Williams continued engaging with precise, measured shots. Every bullet had to count now. She was down to her final magazine. The compound was now a blazing inferno. But the firefight continued with deadly intensity. Williams could see through her scope that the explosion had created both opportunities and new dangers for her teammates. The fire provided concealment, but it also created toxic smoke and the threat of building collapse. Rodriguez had managed to get Morrison to a more defensible position near the compound's east wall. Chen and Brooks were fighting their way toward them through smoke-filled corridors. Williams tracked their progress, ready to eliminate any threats that emerged from the burning buildings. Through her scope, Williams spotted Hassan again. The Taliban commander was rallying his remaining fighters near the compound's main gate. He seemed determined to prevent the SEAL team from escaping, even as his own position became increasingly untenable due to the spreading fires. Williams had 39 rounds remaining, and she intended to use every single one if necessary to get her teammates out alive. She had never been in a situation this desperate, but her training and experience kept her focused on the task at hand. Thompson was providing constant updates on wind conditions and target movements. The smoke from the fires was creating unpredictable air currents that affected bullet trajectory. Williams had to compensate for these changes with each shot. A group of Taliban fighters emerged from a side building, moving to cut off Rodriguez's escape route. Williams engaged them immediately. 3 quick shots, 3 hits. The threat was neutralized before Rodriguez even knew it existed. Chen had reached Morrison and was working frantically to treat his wounds. Williams could see through her scope that Morrison was in bad shape. He had lost a lot of blood and was showing signs of shock. They needed to get him to a proper medical facility immediately. Brooks was coordinating with extraction teams while providing security for Chen as she worked. Williams could hear helicopter rotors in the distance. The cavalry was coming, but they still had to survive the next few minutes. Hassan was shouting orders to his men, trying to organize one final assault before the Americans could escape. Williams could see approximately 15 fighters gathering around him near the main gate. They were preparing to charge Rodriguez's position in a coordinated attack. Williams made a tactical decision that would require perfect execution. Instead of picking off individual fighters, she would target Hassan first to decapitate the leadership, then engage as many of the others as possible before they could reach her teammates. She centered her crosshairs on Hassan's chest. The Taliban commander was standing in the open, gesturing wildly as he issued orders to his men. Williams controlled her breathing and began her trigger pull. The shot flew true. Hassan dropped immediately, struck center mass by the heavy .50 caliber bullet. The effect on his fighters was immediate and dramatic. Without their leader, they hesitated, unsure whether to continue the attack or seek cover. Williams didn't give them time to decide. She began engaging targets rapidly, working from left to right across the group. Each shot was aimed and deliberate, but she fired as quickly as she could acquire new targets. 1 fighter down. 2. 3. The survivors began scattering, their coordinated attack falling apart in the face of Williams' devastating accurate fire. Some tried to take cover behind vehicles, others ran for the buildings. Thompson was calling out new targets and helping Williams track fleeing fighters. 2 more behind the truck on the right, 1 moving toward the north building. Williams adjusted her aim and continued firing. Her rifle was getting hot from the rapid fire, but it continued to perform flawlessly. She took down the fighters behind the truck, then shifted to engage the one heading for the north building. The sound of approaching helicopters was getting louder. Williams could see dust clouds in the distance, indicating the extraction teams were almost in position, but her teammates still had to reach the landing zone, and there were still enemies in the area. Rodriguez was moving Morrison toward the east wall where the helicopter would land. Chen and Brooks were providing covering fire and security. Williams watched over them like a guardian angel, ready to eliminate any threat that emerged. A sniper in one of the compound's guard towers opened fire at Rodriguez's team. Williams immediately shifted her attention to the tower. She could see the muzzle flash through her scope but couldn't get a clear shot at the sniper due to the tower's construction. Williams did something that amazed even Thompson. She aimed for the tower's structural supports, firing precisely placed shots that weakened the tower's foundation. After 3 carefully aimed shots, the entire structure began to collapse, eliminating the sniper threat completely. The first extraction helicopter was approaching the landing zone. Williams could see the pilot fighting to control the aircraft in the turbulent air created by the fires. Landing in these conditions would require exceptional skill. More Taliban fighters were arriving from other compounds in the area. They had heard the explosions and gunfire and were coming to investigate. Williams counted at least 20 new hostiles approaching from the south. She began engaging the new arrivals at extreme range, even for her capabilities. At over 3,000 meters, these were some of the longest shots she had ever attempted in combat. But desperation drove her to push the absolute limits of her equipment and skills. The first shot missed, the bullet striking rocks near the lead fighters. Williams adjusted for the increased range and fired again. This time she hit the target, dropping the lead fighter and causing the others to seek cover. Brooks was guiding the helicopter to the landing zone, while Chen prepared Morrison for transport. Rodriguez was providing perimeter security, his rifle now fully reloaded after scavenging ammunition from fallen enemies. Williams continued engaging the approaching Taliban reinforcements. She had fired 34 rounds now, leaving her with only 5 bullets remaining. Each shot had to count more than ever. 2 more fighters went down to her precise fire. The others began retreating, unwilling to face the invisible sniper, who seemed able to reach out and touch them from impossible distances. The helicopter touched down in a swirl of dust and debris. Rodriguez and Brooks quickly loaded Morrison into the aircraft, while Chen climbed aboard to continue treating his wounds. The pilot was anxious to leave before they drew more enemy fire. Williams watched through her scope as the helicopter lifted off with her teammates safely aboard. But her job wasn't finished yet. Taliban fighters were still trying to shoot down the departing aircraft with rocket-propelled grenades and heavy machine guns. She identified an RPG team preparing to fire at the helicopter. With only 4 rounds remaining, Williams couldn't afford to miss. She took careful aim at the man holding the rocket launcher and fired. The shot hit perfectly, eliminating the RPG threat. The helicopter continued its escape, climbing rapidly to get out of small arms range. A second helicopter was approaching to extract Williams and Thompson, but Taliban reinforcements were getting closer, and they had identified the general area where the sniper fire was coming from. Williams used her remaining 3 rounds to eliminate the most immediate threats to the extraction helicopter. Each shot was perfect, taking down fighters who were trying to engage the incoming aircraft. With her ammunition exhausted, Williams began packing up her equipment. Thompson was already breaking down the spotting scope and preparing their gear for rapid movement to the extraction point. Taliban fighters were climbing the ridge toward their position, but they were still several minutes away. Williams and Thompson moved quickly but carefully, making sure not to leave any sensitive equipment behind. The extraction helicopter landed just as Williams and Thompson reached the landing zone. They threw their gear aboard and climbed in as the pilot immediately began lifting off. As the helicopter climbed away from the ridge, Williams could see the compound burning in the distance. Smoke rose high into the sky, visible for miles around. The mission had not gone as planned, but all members of the team were alive and heading home. Thompson did a final count of Williams's ammunition expenditure. She had fired 39 rounds and achieved 37 confirmed hits, at distances ranging from 2,800 to over 3,000 meters. It was one of the most remarkable displays of long-range marksmanship in military history. Rodriguez's voice came through the radio from the medical evacuation helicopter. Morrison was stable and receiving blood transfusions. The doctors were optimistic about his recovery. Chen's quick medical intervention had saved his life, but Williams' covering fire had made that intervention possible. The intelligence gathered from the compound, despite the ambush, proved valuable. Hassan's death disrupted Taliban operations in the region for months afterward. The courage and skill displayed by the entire team became legendary within the special operations community. Williams never spoke publicly about the events of that day. For her, it was simply another mission. Another day at the office for a professional warrior, but her teammates knew that her extraordinary marksmanship had saved all their lives. The official after-action report classified the mission as a success despite the ambush. Hassan had been eliminated, valuable intelligence had been gathered, and all team members had survived. But the real victory was simpler than that. When Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had whispered, "We're finished," into his radio, he was wrong. As long as Chief Petty Officer Sarah Williams was watching over them with her rifle, they were never finished. Her 39 rounds from 3 kilometers away had turned certain defeat into victory, and a potential tragedy into a story of courage, skill, and the unbreakable bonds between warriors who trust each other with their lives. The helicopters disappeared into the mountains, carrying the team home to fight another day. Behind them, the compound continued to burn, a testament to what happens when elite warriors are pushed to their limits and refuse to give up. In the end, it wasn't superior numbers or careful planning that determined the outcome. It was the extraordinary skill of one sniper who refused to let her teammates down when they needed her most.